These are the tales from South Florida for you, with your host, Bill Monty.
One of the things that I remember growing up in South Florida in the 1960s, when we first moved here in 1965, was watching the 6 p.m. news. That's normally when we sat down for dinner in the house. And like most families of that time, the TV was turned on. That was how we became the first generation to have a war brought into our living rooms, and I guess in this case our dining rooms, with the Vietnam War. It was there, while eating from sometimes TV dinners that we thought were wonderful treats, not the awful thing they actually were, that I got to know and see the wonderful Ralph Renick. Ralph Renick was the anchorman on the WTVJ Channel 4 News from 6 o'clock to 6:30. He was followed by the number one newsman in America, maybe the world for that matter, Walter Cronkite. Everyone trusted and loved Cronkite. He had been the man who had told America that President Kennedy had been assassinated, and he did it in a way that left the news persona behind and became just the story of a man telling you some news he'd rather not tell. He was also the newsman who had the nerve and the bravery to say on live television that the war in Vietnam was not winnable. That did not gain him fans in a lot of the more conservative viewerships. For many of us in America, that's exactly what made him the greatest newsman of our lifetime. We found that same type of persona in Ralph Renick. Ralph Renick was born in New York, New York in 1928. He and his family, 2 brothers and his mother who'd been recently divorced, moved to Hialeah, Florida 11 years later. And that's where Ralph grew up. He wanted to become a radio personality, but as a student at University of Miami, he found himself the recipient of a scholarship that led him to a fledgling news station for this new thing called television, which sent him on a path that would forever change his life and perhaps how news was viewed in the South Florida region. WTVJ Channel 4 was owned by a man named Colonel Mitchell Wolfson, who was also the head of Wometco. If you've been here a long time, you remember the name Wometco. We haven't heard it for a while. It was sold in the early 80s, but it used to be everywhere. The movie theaters were Wometco theaters. Channel 4 was a Wometco TV station. I talked about Skipper Chuck a few episodes ago, and Wometco played a big part in his career and in his show, the Skipper Chuck Playhouse. For Ralph Renick, he and the Colonel had an instant bond. Even though he was a young man with no experience, there was something about Ralph Renick that the Colonel appreciated and trusted, and even famously said at one point, "I'll run Wometco, you run the news station." And that's exactly what Ralph Renick did. Besides being the anchorman, he was also the news director. And he set the tone for how news would be presented in South Florida for many, many years. Renick was a reliable person that you could turn on and know you were going to get straight news. That must be kind of hard for younger people to know now, if you're even watching the news. I don't even know if younger generations turn on the news at any point. But I believe, and I don't mean this in any condescending way or as a put down, because I think that news has become exactly what Paddy Chayefsky predicted in the brilliant screenplay that he wrote for the movie Network. It has become entertainment. So it is not the fault of the people who are on the news today that they are simply teleprompter readers of what's happening, but they don't have any journalistic involvement with it all. They're just reading the news. Unless it's something personal like a hurricane or a major storm, they're really just there to read whatever copy is placed in front of them. But Ralph Renick, and honestly, I don't remember any other newscasters at other stations of the time. I honestly don't. I'm sure there were others on other stations. but I don't remember who they were. Now, you think of Walter Cronkite, you think of Huntley and Brinkley were probably the biggest competition that he had. They were NBC News. They came on opposite Walter Cronkite. I don't remember that same thing for Ralph Renick. He just seemed to have a monopoly. In his position, he hired the first black reporter in 1968, the first in South Florida. He hired Jane Chastain, who was the first female sportscaster working for WTVJ. He was a groundbreaker. He delivered the news in sort of a Ward Cleaver-esque manner, if you know what I mean. Ward Cleaver had a sense of humor. He smiled. The father, I'm not talking, of course, about the fictional father on Leave It to Beaver. But he also was serious when he had to be. And you knew that you didn't fool around with Ward Cleaver. And it was sort of the same thing, I think, with Ralph Renick. Just as everything was starting to change in the 1980s in the way that events were happening on television and how news was being presented, it also was happening for Mr. Renick. Wometco was sold to an investment firm. The investment firm wanted an anchor person who would bring in the younger audience. They had started losing in the ratings wars to Channel 10's Ann Bishop and Dwight Lauderdale. When the Colonel died, the writing was on the wall for Ralph Renick. After missing several weeks due to a skiing accident, he abruptly announced his retirement in 1985. He didn't announce at the time, but he was planning to run for governor, which he did eventually do, but he dropped out of the race early on after investing about $100,000 of his own money into the campaign. He came back for a short time, around 1988, for the Ralph Renick Report. It was a 2.5-minute editorial piece on WTVJ. But other than that, he pretty much disappeared, and again, died quietly in 1991. He left, though, a tradition that has never been matched by anyone, and never will be. You look at the news as it goes now, and it's nothing more. Look, let's face it. When the local news is hyping the episode of American Idol that night, and that's a news story, things are not going well for the establishment of news in South Florida or America or the world. I can't imagine sitting here thinking that Ralph Renick or Walter Cronkite, in the middle of all the stories that they did, serious and some lighthearted, but most of them serious because of the times, would have ever allowed a 3-minute promotional piece on a reality show. I can't see that. I think we've lost something in that we no longer have that purity of the news. And look, Renick and Cronkite, they came from a long line of people. But, Edward R. Murrow, who is now being portrayed on a Broadway stage in a play with George Clooney, was probably what they aspired to be. Renick wanted to be Cronkite, and I'm sure the younger people who came after Renick, John Hambrick, Tony Segreto, I'm sure they wanted to be Ralph Renick. But no one could be. It really was one of a kind. And it got me to thinking about all the news anchors from the time that he was coming towards the end of his career that were famous. If you're from South Florida, I think some of these will jog your memory. In no particular order, some of those anchors were the aforementioned Ann Bishop, Glenn Rinker, Mike Schneider, Anna Esquie, Barbara Sloan. Oh, I remember Barbara Sloan. Susan Lickman, Joan Lovett, Kelly Craig. Oh, I think I had a crush on Kelly Craig. Cambrell Marshall. Wow, remember Cambrell Marshall? He was on Channel 10. Wayne Ferris, Channel 7. Richard Whitcomb. Sally Fitz. Who could ever forget Sally Fitz? Certainly Neil Rogers never did. Molly Turner was from the old school. Connie Hicks. Tom Randalls. Jim Dyer. Bob Mayer. Jim Brosmer. The times are gone. They were great, though. I still watch the news in the morning. I kind of switch back and forth between Channel 7 because it stays more local and doesn't go to national news. But in none of the voices and none of the faces do I see the sincerity, the seriousness, and the twinkle in the eye of Ralph Renick, who ended all of his broadcasts with good night and may the good news be yours. What a great ending. What are your memories of Ralph Renick and all the great newscasters that we've had in South Florida over the years? You can drop me a line at talesfromsouthflorida@gmail.com or scroll down in the notes here to the SpeakPipe link, and you can leave me a 90-second voicemail telling me about your favorite South Florida memories. Always visit us at talesfromsouthflorida.com to catch up on the latest and the greatest tales that you might have missed from the past and the upcoming ones. And to make sure you don't miss any upcoming ones, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button to get notified when new episodes drop. We do so appreciate it. And if you please, could leave a comment or a rating, that would be great. Really appreciate that too. Hey, until the next time we talk, my friends, as always, I remind you, please be safe and be kind. Go out there and have a great tropical South Florida day. And now, the theme music.
Let's take a talk down memory lane, 'cause the stories around here are just insane. Pirates World, the Sporto and Wolfies do. Palm Beach to Key West, that's where we grew. These are the tales from South Florida for you, with your host Bill Monty.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.